Good morning and welcome to the Crypto Morning Market Report. I'm your host, Taylor, and we're going to get into it here. It is the Fed Day. Fed Day is upon us. Let's get into the sentiment here. There is nothing more important than the Fed Day on Fed Day. Bitcoin fear and greed is at 26, and there's a 25 basis point cut coming in, a 95% likelihood of that. So definitely keeping an eye on the rate cut probabilities today. A big swing in those probabilities could potentially have a big effect on price action for some of the most liquid and reactive assets known as cryptocurrencies. I'm going to issue a very important note today. So FOMC Day brings with it heavy market manipulation. So we advise the beginner traders keep leverage and position sizes modest, meaning this is not the day to try to get rich, folks. This is not the day to really swing for the fences. This is the day that the most experienced traders, the guy that's been down in Miami, the guy that's been in the Bahamas, he flies back up to New York and he gets behind the trading desk that the junior was sitting at, and he leverages all of his experience to try to steal your money, right? Not steal isn't the right word, to trick you into selling or into doing something that transfers the money to him. Be very, very careful today. The most experienced bullfrogs are at the trading desks. Major focus, all eyes are on Fed Powell's press briefing later today at 2:30. We're going to be covering that live starting at 1:50 over on the Tim Warren Trading Channel. That will be when our coverage starts right at 1:50. We will be there for the rate decision that drops at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard, and then shortly after, the press briefing will start. SEC Chair Paul Atkins said that many types of ICOs should not be considered securities and thus fall outside of the SEC's jurisdiction. This is a bullish interpretation from the top regulator of financial markets, saying, a very favorable thing for crypto. Bullish vibes. This is an interesting one here. Coinbase Institution said that speculative excess has been reduced to 4.5 from 10% this summer. This should reduce the chances of 10-10 type events. So October 10th, there was obviously a very big liquidation, wiped out a lot of liquidity, wiped out a lot of leverage, I should say. It's very unlikely now. Coinbase's institutional is telling us it's unlikely that something like that, like an October 10th type event, could happen, because if there was something structural or something, an issue somewhere, there wouldn't be a whole lot of leverage that would be weighting down, and there wouldn't be an incentive for that leverage to go down and hunt that out. So essentially, this is good. Is it good for a heady reason? Yes. It's not super intuitive why this is bullish if you're newer to trading and investing, but folks who are more experienced will understand why this is significant. All right. Stripe's Tempo blockchain opens public testnet with MasterCard, UBS, Klarna on board. Kind of a neutral headline there. I wouldn't say it's super bullish for a chain like Ethereum necessarily to have these other corporate chains coming out. You also have CC is the ticker. I can't remember the name of it, but these chains are going to give Ethereum a bit of a run for its money. It's going to take market share from names like Ethereum and Solana, which further unfortunately further confirms my theory that you want to be out of the long tail risk of cryptocurrencies, altcoins. You want to be in the the blue chips, right? So if you're out in some, bottom 300 market cap, layer one especially, it doesn't have anything unique going on about it, or it thinks it does. Injective comes to mind. ICP comes to mind, right? Not saying that they'll never do well. What I'm saying though is that it's headlines like these where a corporation, Stripe, is launching a blockchain, and it's got UBS, Klarna, MasterCard kind of behind it. I think that then you have to ask, okay, well, which are the blockchains that are going to survive these much more established firms and groups? And I think the answer is obviously Ethereum, Solana, XRP, and you go down the line. Maybe you stop somewhere around SUI and AVAX, right? This does not, and this is for layer ones, right? There's a whole another classification of RWA specific, like Ondo and Plume, which this type of a phenomenon probably won't take market share from. All right, so that's a good amount of discussion on that. SpaceX plans 2026 IPO to raise 30 billion with 1.5 trillion valuation. Not really a crypto headline, but this is bullish, right? And this is bullish for a reason that I don't talk about almost at all. But I actually got my start in the stock market coming in through the IPO world. I not not actually writing IPOs and doing the SEC filings and stuff, but just trading them, right? Understanding what IPOs were and figuring out how to lose as much money as I can in the IPO world. I since don't dabble in IPOs. I'm not encouraging you to dabble in IPOs either. What I'm saying though is that what I learned while studying the IPO world, which if you don't know, IPO is like an ICO, initial coin offering, but IPO is initial public offering. So this is when a company goes from private equity, which is what OpenAI, which is what SpaceX is right now, to public equity, right? It's something that your grandma, your fish, your nephew, your boss, anybody can buy it if they have a Robinhood account or TD Ameritrade or something like this. So public equities, private equities, you can't touch private equities. Who can? Registered investors, right? And there's all kind of classifications. You have to, all kind of specifications you have to meet in order to be a registered investor. SpaceX IPOing in 2026 tells me that the finance department over at SpaceX, and importantly Elon Musk, believes that an IPO is makes sense in that point in time, which tells me that that's good. When I studied IPOs, IPOs often signal kind of the top of the market, right? So if they're saying that SpaceX wants to IPO, and also OpenAI has also talked about IPOing, I don't know that they have a 2026 target for that, but this tells me that finance departments at the biggest private equity company in the world, meaning privately traded, it's not a PE company. SpaceX is not PE, but it's behind the private equity curtain. They think that markets will be higher, or at least they at least believe that markets will have a high risk appetite for the SpaceX IPO. I hope this makes sense. I've been kind of quiet about this because it's really only been a bearish angle on crypto, because you had Gemini IPO, you had it's the only one that's coming to my mind, but you had probably 5 or 8 significant crypto related IPOs in 2025. I didn't really want to say anything because I don't really know how that's going to relate necessarily, and if the IPO trend of topping of market of signaling market tops is even relevant anymore in the changing AI landscape of public investments. But this is a good sign because it's telling me, hey, Elon and his finance department think that there will be a risk appetite at some point in 2026 when they plan to IPO. And by the way, that 1.5 trillion valuation is quite high. That's interesting, but it doesn't really tell me much. That doesn't give me much to do as an investor, right? It's just a big number. Great for Elon. Looking ahead, we have the non-farm payrolls, the unemployment, in the core and headline inflation prints on the 16th and the 18th. And then I'm still holding on to it. That Supreme Court ruling on tariffs, we have to keep our eye on that. We don't have a date for that yet, but that is an important one. Asia was mixed. Apparently China also, this one didn't make it into the morning sentiment, but apparently China also is signaling that they're going to be doing quite a bit more stimulus into what was called property stocks. I'm not sure what that means, if that's like REITs, or like real estate stocks, or if property is a different translation there from China, if it's just their stock market. I'm not sure. All right, let's jump into the comments here and see what folks are saying. I hope you all are doing well on this Fed day. Let's check it out here. Yori, first in the comments per usual, said, good morning. Will it be a hawkish cut today? Interesting. Yeah. So it's almost like the complete inverse of Japan, right? Because Japan is doing hikes, but they're also doing quantitative easing. And here we're doing cuts, but Jerome Powell may come out and be hawkish. I think that the inconsistency with that comparison, though, is that probably he's going to announce something about QE, give a bit of an understanding of when to expect it. And that may come in the form of him being asked a question, hey, Jerome, when QE, and him saying, not anytime soon, right? That's bearish, but it's at least reducing the uncertainty and kind of giving an idea of a timeline. So that would be, I would take that, right? I would be happy with that. Maybe not happy with that, but that would be welcome information to at least know when QE is and isn't going to come in. Jerome will cut, but the FUD, he doesn't like Trump. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know that that's what I would hang my hat on. I think that Jerome Powell at this point is mostly motivated by his legacy. I think that if there is, I'm sure there is, animosity towards Donald Trump and the Trump administration, I think it's probably on the lower rungs of the priority list for him. I think he probably is more thinking, how do I, how do I, how do I look in terms of who came before me? Alan Greenspan, Janet Yellen, Jerome Powell. Like, how am I going to be viewed as the chairman of the Federal Reserve based on these last couple figures? And I think that he wants to be known as someone who kept his wits about him, right? Who kept it low and slow and just, you know, we'll see. I think unfortunately, he's probably, it'll be interesting to see how history looks back at him, because he has a bit of a counterintuitive luxury, which is that Donald Trump is the kind of the counterparty. He's in the administration. So any kind of backlash, any kind of negative kind of criticism that you could have for Jerome Powell, future historians could say, hey, it was really he was facing an uphill battle with having such a vocal and rambunctious executive branch while he was the Fed chairman. And we'll see. So that could be one way that he's viewed in terms of his legacy. But I think that legacy is the most important thing, and he ultimately just wants to kind of continue to wrap up properly what had to be done during the COVID, or what the Fed believed had to be done during the COVID pandemic. And that basically means he wants to keep inflation coming down, keep it anchored to 2%, and also address some of the things coming up for unemployment and the low hire, high fire environment that we're seeing in the labor picture. So I don't know if his motivation is going to be anti-Trump. I really do think that he probably doesn't like Trump, but I don't think that really influences his actions all that much. Okay. Kenny said good morning. Jason K said good morning. Give us the hopium, Taylor. I will. Hopefully I have delivered some a little bit. Freddie said, let's go. He also said I'm broke. Jerome, Mike Jones said T-Shroom, what's up? Just a Dude said, Freddie, I know how that feels, being broke, I believe. Circle IPO was crypto. Yes, that was the other really big one. That's definitely another big one. See, you guys are picking up on what I have to say here about the IPO stuff. I haven't really unpacked my thoughts on that very much, or even talked about it at all, because it's a little bit complicated. Like, we don't talk about that very much, and so I don't know how useful it's going to be to kind of share my thoughts on that. But it's good to see that some people were tracking with what I had to say there. Ken Monster said, morning, y'all. Hi there, T. Hope you're doing good this morning. All I want for Christmas is Bitcoin. Great T-shirt idea for next year. Good morning, T-Shroom. Expecting rate cut and about future. Let's wait and see the data comments. Any thoughts on government shutdown in January? Is there any headway happening? That's a really good point there, Jagger. That is not in the picture quite yet. Obviously, today everybody's kind of focused on the Federal Reserve, the FOMC day. However, there is a can that was kicked down the road in order to end the shutdown in November, and that can is going to come back to bite us in January. There will probably be some issues there. Maybe creating a risk off environment in January, but maybe not. It just kind of depends. Hopefully, it doesn't coincide with the passage of the Clarity Act, so you get a negative suppressant of the government shutdown, but also the passage of what should have been a bullish catalyst for crypto. That would really stink. I do think that if the government shut down, they can't vote for a bill. So there's that complexity. Right. Do you think SUI would be good spot swing today? Could be. You got to be careful though. Okay, so here I'm going to get into the charts. Before I do that, guys, if you're looking for an excellent crypto exchange to trade on, check out 2bit. 2bit is amazing, and you can find the link for 2bit down in the link tree of this video in the description. So go check that out and start trading today with 2bit. All right, going over to our charts, what I want to just talk about is I want to zoom in here and give a little bit of context to that question that was just asked. I usually don't go this low on the time frame, but I'm not going to give you much insight as much as I'm going to give you a bit of a warning. Okay, so we have the decision will come in today at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the 10th. So I believe that's here, right at 4. So that's when the decision comes in. And then a little bit after that, we have the decision, okay? Or we have the press briefing, excuse me. So this is Bitcoin. This is not SUI. But let me just paint a picture for you all, right? And this is why I would say I'm hesitant to give any thoughts on trading today, swing trading, scalp trading, or maybe entering a long-term position today or exiting a long-term position today. And I'm about to illustrate why. So look at this volatility right here for Bitcoin. This is something that just happens somewhat organically, right? Probably some insiders heard that there was possibility of the Clarity Act being passed this next week, so they went ahead and bought a decent amount. That pushed that disproportionately created buy pressure, and you had a similar amount of demand during that period, so you got higher prices, right? If supply stays the same but demand increases, then you get higher prices, right? So this is organic. This just happened, right? Not saying that it couldn't have been manipulated, but it's this happened recently for Bitcoin, right? I guess is what I'm trying to say. So the FOMC decision is way out here. It is possible that if you were to enter a swing trade here, like let's say you think that Bitcoin could get up to 95 by the end of the day because they're going to announce the cutting of the rates, and then Jerome Powell's going to get up there and say one or two things that are going to signal QE in 2026. That's a very solid thesis, by the way. That's not like a crazy out there thing at all. That's kind of the base case right now for, I think, a lot of risk allocators in the world. But what you have to realize is while that makes sense for price to be sideways till we get to the decision, get a little bit further to the briefing, and then we just go higher, that makes sense, right? There's a lot of logic to support that kind of a move. What you have to realize is that the big money bankers, those guys I told you that flew in from Miami, they're flying in from all over their vacation spots back to New York to get behind the trading desk to manipulate the markets. That's what could potentially happen. So logic says this is what should happen, right? And I don't know if I can do another color. I can do another color. That's cool. It's going to just change the color. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just keep it red. What could potentially happen is something along these lines, right? What it would be counter to logic and reason, but the manipulators could come in and dump the price, right? They could come in with a bunch of supply that they've been accumulating all through here or something, waiting for the Federal Reserve event, right? They come in and they dump 2,000 Bitcoin or something like that, and price goes down. What are they able to? Yeah, they sold Bitcoin up here, right? But if price comes down and then you have any percentage of retail or some hedge fund that wasn't in the loop, then there's going to be more selling than just what they would have done on the market, right? So you come even lower, and all of a sudden you're in an environment where it should have been bullish, right? It should have followed this logic and reason here, but it didn't. Instead, the manipulators dumped a bunch of crypto, knowing that the right movement should have been to the upside, and they misdirect folks. They misdirect price to the downside. Some people get shaken out by that, so there's an even further sell-off, but then it stabilizes, and then it goes to the proper repricing zone, right? So that's why you have to be careful with a swing trade. Now, knowing that, what could you do? You could just go ahead and take the trade and just be patient and maybe do like 70. If you were going to invest with $100, you could maybe do 75 today right here, and then just know that there's a good chance of manipulation on the other side of this press briefing, and just accumulate the next $25 worth of Bitcoin down here. And then if it's a swing trade, then you just sell it all up here, right? Something like that. So that's my thoughts on a swing trade. SUI specifically, I don't know. I mean, honestly, if you're going to trade the FOMC, I would probably just stay in Bitcoin, maybe Ethereum, right? Because that's going to be the most liquid. The smaller coins can be manipulated even more, right? Okay. Another scenario we could see here on a swing trade is that through the rest of the day, because we're only at 11 a.m. right, or 10:30 a.m. right now, you could have a bunch of manipulators come in and bid up Bitcoin right now. And we get up to 95 even before the press briefing, right? And so let's say you were thinking about taking a swing trade. Maybe you enter here thinking, okay, well, we're going to go hit, 95. Again, very logical, very rational that you would think we would go higher. But instead, they dump all that supply that they just bought, right? And then maybe there's another cohort of manipulators that were doing the strategy that I just laid out for you, and they dump even more, right? And all of a sudden, we're back below 90, right? That is okay. If you're hearing me say we're back below 90 and you're shaking your head, oh, that's impossible, you are wrong. There's a strong possibility today that we see volatility that looks more like this, right? Now we could see volatility looks like this, like to the upside in a crazy way. But you have to realize what the FOMC is, okay? Because some of you are newer to investing, newer to trading, and you're sitting there, you being like, what even is FOMC? It is essentially taking the market out of a period of uncertainty and speculation into a period of certainty. Every time the Federal Reserve, who is the biggest contributor to supply of currency, the US dollar, and the bond market, they are the biggest contributor to the dynamics within those two markets. Again, US dollar and bond market, they have a lot of power, right? And so the market wants to know, what is the Fed going to do? And maybe that's obvious to you. Maybe you're more experienced and that you're rolling your eyes, obviously. But in this moment, there are lies that can be told on the charts, right? And if you are experienced and you understand the kind of lies that can be told, I just told you two of them on the chart. I just showed you two ways. Then you understand that today is just extremely impactful. The Federal Reserve is going to have the final word on all of the speculation that's happened since the last decision, which I believe was in just a few weeks ago, right? So since that last decision, you've had a bunch of speculation, a bunch of experts coming out and saying the Fed is going to hike, is going to cut. Oh no, they're not going to cut. And we saw that in poly market this time. We've seen more volatility in the poly market spread for the FOMC decision this go around than I've ever seen before. I'll show you guys this because it's actually pretty interesting. What does that tell me? That tells me that there's been a lot of disagreement, right? You can look here and you can see all of this volatility back here. I mean, uncertainty, disagreement, right? Eventually, it all flushed out, and we went back to a place where it's almost a certainty that they're going to cut, right? But all of this speculation, and there were good points that were made here, right? There were actual Fed members that came out. I remember I believe, several Fed members came out and said things that led the market to believe they weren't going to cut, right? And so that brought the more probable outcome to as high as 75% chance of a no cut, right? So that's why today is important. That's why the FOMC is important, because it takes all of that chaos and it flushes it out and it says, this is what the Fed is going to do. And this is why the press briefing is so important, because we kind of already know they're going to cut rates. The question is, what do they do next? Do they continue to cut rates, or do they signal that this was probably the last rate cut and rate cuts are only going to be in 2025 and they may come back in the second half of 2026, or they may not come back at all, right? Now, if Donald Trump has his way, that's definitely not going to happen. But Jerome Powell is still the chairman until May. I believe May is his last month, or he's out in May. That's a decent amount of decisions. I think that's at least 3 decisions that the Fed will be able to make under Jerome Powell, right? So what Jerome Powell says is important today, but we know that he's on his way out. Certainty is being delivered today. Certainty for the markets is like caffeine, right? The markets love certainty. If I'm a risk taker, I want to know all the data I possibly can to plug into my models to be able to predict the future, upside or downside. If I'm being deprived of information, right, as we kind of are now, we're in the extreme last moments of uh, a lack of clarity from the FOMC since the last decision. Right now, there will never be a time where there was more uncertainty about what the Federal Reserve was going to do since the last decision. By the end of the day, we will know so much more about what 2026 is going to look like from a monetary policy standpoint. Hopefully, I feel like I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over, so we'll move on. But that is kind of why this is important, right? It's because Jerome Powell's going to come out. He's going to say some stuff that clarifies everything, and the markets will respond to that because it's information they crave. Remember, this phenomenon is exacerbated because in the previous period, we had a prolonged government shutdown, a record-setting government shutdown, where the Bureau of Labor Statistics was incapable, although they probably could have done it if they really wanted to, if they were true patriots, right? But the Bureau of Labor Statistics was unable to go out and do the inflation and the jobs reporting data gathering efforts that they usually do to be able to produce those prints, and for the Fed to make decisions based off of that, and for the markets to make decisions based off of that. So here we are. We're in the day. The Fed's going to have to make a decision, and we're going to see what it is. Jagger said, I feel some companies IPO if they feel headwinds coming or to get early investors less control. Am I way off on this? Companies will IPO for all kinds of different reasons, right? And it also changes as time goes by. Right now, we're coming out of a period where there's been a strong incentive to remain private equity, to remain private. And that has a lot to do with a woman named Lisa Kahn, who I believe was the Secretary of Commerce under Joe Biden. Yeah, she wasn't the Treasury. I think she had to have been the Commerce Secretary. Somebody, I can't remember what her position was, but there was a major Biden official who basically made IPOs and mergers and acquisitions less favorable in general, right? And this is described at length on the All In podcast. That's kind of where I'm basing my understanding off of it. So now that she's gone, she's out, and the wrath of Khan, so to speak, is gone. Now we're kind of transitioning back into a world where that's more capitalist friendly, more M&A and more IPOing is kind of back on the menu, so to speak. So companies are coming out of the private equity world and they're IPOing and coming into the public markets where they can be valued by the market as a whole, not just by the liquidity that's in the private equity markets. So companies will IPO for a lot of different reasons. That is one reason that has almost nothing to do with trying to keep opportunity away from retail and the little guys. I think that's probably very low on the list of what a CEO and a CFO care about when they're deciding whether or not to IPO. I think what they really care about is what is the risk on sentiment going to be? Because if I'm a private company, all my investors are venture capital and sovereign wealth funds that are able to get into private equity. They're all very highly sophisticated investors who won't sell during downtrends because they're sophisticated, and some of them have lockup periods and all that. I don't want to take my company public and kind of give birth. I don't want to take it out of that protected, highly regulated classification and take it into the public markets, which is just, the sharks come out, the wolves come out and they tear it to pieces. If there's some kind of issue with your company and your business model, price is going to go down. We saw that with Circle. I think Circle is going to do well over the long term, but the IPO price that they came out with was was too high, right? I think, and the market responded and expressed itself in that way because I think ultimately, in the case of Circle, they're heavily exposed to treasuries, and so rates are very important to them. And if rates are going to go down in 2026, well, what's going to happen to the business model for stablecoins for Circle? Okay, getting a little too heady there, but IPOs are important. And the fact that SpaceX is planning to do one in 2026 tells me that there are very sophisticated financiers out there, including Elon Musk, who see a world where in 2026 there's going to be a decent risk appetite. I wouldn't want to birth my company out of private into public if I anticipate a recession, right? If I anticipate a type of environment where investors in general are defensive and they wouldn't want to take a position on an IPO or a newly public company. I think I'm talking about IPOs way too much. Hopefully, you guys are appreciating it. So Jagger, I don't disagree with you, but you have to remember there's all kinds of different priorities for a company as it's going into IPO, but the main priority is there going to be a risk on environment in the future? All right, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and happy FOMC. We'll be going live at 1:50 Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you there. Adios.